So what if I told you that the key to completely transforming your finances, your health, or even your skills isn't some brand new life hack, but a 300-year-old branch of math? Yeah, I'm talking about calculus. But forget all those complicated equations you might remember from school. Today, we're going to unpack calculus not as a class, but as a seriously powerful mental model for understanding and, more importantly, creating change in your own life.
All right, here's the game plan. We're going to start with an ancient puzzle about motion that stumped people for centuries. Then we'll get into the two core ideas that finally cracked the code and see how they can literally compound everything in your life. We'll also look at why our brains are kind of bad at thinking this way, and then we'll wrap it all up with a simple action plan you can start using like today.
So let's kick things off with the puzzle of change. You know, for the longest time, math was awesome at describing things that just stood still. But it had this one massive blind spot: anything that moved. This was the central question, right? Ancient math was fantastic for static things, the area of a circle, the angles of a pyramid, but growth, motion, that stuff was a total paradox. Just think about Zeno's famous arrow paradox. To hit its target, an arrow has to first travel half the distance, and then half of the remaining distance, and so on forever. It seemed like motion itself was just an illusion that this old-school, snapshot-based math could never, ever capture.
So for thousands of years, math was basically stuck. But then boom, the 17th century hits. You've got the scientific revolution going on, and suddenly there's this urgent need to describe things like orbiting planets, falling objects, even growing economies. The old tools just weren't cutting it. And that's when two absolute geniuses, Isaac Newton and Gottfried Leibniz, came along and, working completely separately, they created the solution, calculus.
So how did they do it? How did Newton and Leibniz finally crack this ancient problem? Well, they didn't just invent a new formula. They came up with a whole new way of seeing the world. And it all boils down to two really simple but incredibly powerful ideas: rates and totals. The huge conceptual leap was this: stop focusing on the static snapshot and start focusing on the dynamic flow. So instead of obsessing over your current bank balance, which is just a single number at a single point in time, calculus tells us to focus on the rate of change. Think about your monthly savings rate. That flow is what actually builds your future total. The first big idea is called the derivative. Now, don't let the technical name scare you off. All it is the rate of change at one specific moment in time. The speedometer in your car is the perfect analogy. It doesn't tell you how far you've gone on your whole trip. It just tells you your speed right now. A derivative is basically a speedometer for anything that's growing or changing.
And the other side of this coin is the integral. So if the derivative is the flow, the integral is the total amount that builds up over time. The rain gutter here is a fantastic way to picture it. The integral doesn't care if it was a light drizzle or a total downpour second by second. It just adds up every single drop to tell you how much water is in the bucket at the end of the storm. It's the grand total of all those little tiny changes. And here is the absolute game changer. Finding the rate of change, that's the derivative, and summing up the total accumulation, the integral, are actually inverse operations. They undo each other. This connection, which is known as the fundamental theorem of calculus, was the eureka moment that completely unlocked modern science. It meant we could predict the future of any system, as long as we knew its current rate of change.
Okay, so that's the science lesson. But here is where it gets really personal. Let's take this incredible idea of compounding change and see how it applies directly to your money, your health, and your goals. This quote from James Clear just nails it. A tiny rate of improvement, just 1% better each day, feels like nothing, right? But it doesn't just add up, it compounds. The integral, the total sum of that tiny daily effort over a whole year, results in you being an unbelievable 37 times better. It's wild. And this rate mindset works for pretty much everything. Instead of staring at your total bank account number and feeling overwhelmed, you just focus on your savings rate. Instead of worrying about your current weight, you track your weekly exercise or your daily steps. In every single case, you shift your attention from the big, intimidating total to the small, dynamic rate that you actually have control over today.
Let's make this really concrete. Saving $100 a month, it feels small. After a year, it's not going to change your life. But if you keep that small, consistent rate going for 30 years with just a modest return, the integral, the total pile of cash, is nearly $80,000. That is the incredible magic of a steady rate over a long, long time.
But check this out. It's not just about the rate you save. It's about the time you have. This chart shows an early starter who saved less per month actually ended up with more money than the late starter who saved more. That extra decade of compounding for the early bird made all the difference. Time is the ultimate amplifier for any rate of change.
Okay, so if this is so powerful, why isn't everyone doing it? Why isn't this intuitive? Well, it turns out our brains are just not naturally wired to think this way. Let's dig into the cognitive bias that we're all fighting against. Let me ask you a quick puzzle. You've got a single lily pad in a pond. The pads double every single day. If the pond is completely full on day 30, on what day was it half full? Now, if your first gut instinct was day 15, don't worry, you're not alone. Our brains just love to think in straight lines. The correct answer, of course, is day 29. The pond was half full just one day before it was completely full. And this little puzzle perfectly exposes what's called our exponential growth bias. Our brains expect things to grow in a nice, steady, linear way, so we consistently, wildly underestimate the explosive power of compounding. It's why things like credit card debt or a viral video seem to explode out of absolutely nowhere. So thinking dynamically, thinking in rates, is just fundamentally more powerful. Saying our revenue is $1 million this quarter is a static fact. It's a snapshot. But saying our revenue is growing at 5% per quarter, that's a predictive trend. It lets you see where you're headed, and way more importantly, it gives you a lever you can pull to actually change that future.
Okay, let's put it all together. It's time to turn all this theory into a concrete action plan that you can use for any goal you have in your life.
Here it is, your 5-step calculus plan. First, just get super clear on your goal and where you are right now. Second, identify your key rate of change, that one repeatable action you can measure. Third, and this is the most crucial part, set a small, sustainable increment. Don't go crazy. Fourth, project it out. See what that small rate actually becomes in a year. And finally, step 5, track it, reflect on it, and adjust your rate if you need to. This simple system turns a vague wish into a real, unstoppable process.
So in the end, mastering this whole mental model really just comes down to this one simple question. What 1% change will you make today? You don't have to overhaul your entire life overnight. You just need to find one small positive rate of change, that 1% improvement, and just stick with it. Because as calculus shows us, it's those tiny, consistent changes that compound over time to create a future that can be unrecognizably, amazingly better than the present.